The headlights of Willa Harker's truck caught the shape at the last possible second. A dark mass sprawled across the center line of Route 12, barely visible through the wall of driving snow. She hit the brakes hard. The truck fishtailed across both lanes before grinding to a stop on the gravel shoulder, the windshield wipers slapping uselessly at the blizzard. Her coffee thermos rolled off the seat and clattered against the door. She sat there for a second, breathing. It was 2:47 a.m. Stopping was the most natural thing she'd ever done. It was also the most dangerous decision she would ever make. Willa Harker was 29 years old, a licensed large animal veterinarian, and the sole owner of the Harker family ranch outside Drummond, Montana, 112 acres of frozen pastureland left to her by her grandfather 3 years ago. She'd just spent 4 hours at the Macready property 10 miles east, coaxing a breech foal into the world. She smelled like blood and hay and cold. Her back ached. Her daughter Penny was home, asleep, watched over by Kylie from town, who charged $12 an hour and always fell asleep on the couch by midnight. Willa needed to get home. She did not need to stop. She stopped anyway. She pulled on her heavy Carhartt coat, grabbed the industrial flashlight from behind the seat, and stepped out into the Montana cold. The wind slammed into her face like a fist. The temperature was somewhere around 8 degrees, and the storm that the weather service had been threatening all week had finally arrived in full. She expected a deer, maybe an elk hit by a passing semi. What she found stopped her cold. Lying across the yellow dividing line was a dog. Not just any dog, a Belgian Malinois, the kind of animal that made police officers nod with quiet respect when they passed one on the street. He was enormous, maybe 85 pounds, his tan and black coat matted and dark, with something that was definitely not snow. He was wearing a vest. A serious vest. Heavy black tactical nylon with ballistic plating and webbing that held equipment pouches, all of it stripped of any visible insignia. Where unit patches would normally be, there were only rectangular shadows of Velcro adhesive, clean and deliberate. Stamped into the collar in cold metal letters was a designation, K9FT4. The dog lifted his head when the flashlight beam hit him. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. His amber eyes, glassy with pain but completely disturbingly focused, looked straight at her. Like he had been waiting, like he had known she would come. "Hey," Willa said softly. She crouched in the snow, keeping her movement slow and deliberate. "Hey, buddy, I've got you." The wound was in his left flank, low and clean, a through and through. Not a hunting round. The entry was too precise, too deliberate. She'd extracted enough fence wire and rebar from livestock over the years to know the difference between an accident and intent. Someone had shot this dog on purpose. She got him into the truck bed with more adrenaline than technique, wrapping him in the thermal blanket she kept behind the seat for exactly this kind of situation. He was heavy and going into shock, but he allowed it. The entire time she worked, his amber eyes tracked her hands with an almost clinical attention, as if he was cataloguing each thing she did and deciding whether it was acceptable. She drove the remaining 6 miles to the ranch with one eye on the rearview mirror. The barn was warm from the 2 heat lamps she kept running through the winter for the horses. Willa bypassed the house entirely, pulling the truck around to the side entrance. She didn't want to wake Penny. She didn't want to explain this until she understood it herself. Under the harsh overhead light, she went to work. She removed the tactical vest carefully, unbuckling the heavy chest plate and lifting it free. The gear was sophisticated in a way that made her uncomfortable. There were wire conduits sewn into the lining connecting to a compact module on the back panel, military-grade by the look of it. The module had a small green indicator light blinking at precise 1-second intervals. Willa stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked up the heaviest wrench from her pegboard and smashed the module into dark plastic shards. She wasn't entirely sure why she did it. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that made her check under her truck before long drives on dark roads. With the module dead and silent, she focused on the wound. Local anesthetic, saline irrigation, sutures, the same procedure she'd have used on a calf, scaled down for the anatomy. The dog lay still through all of it. His breathing was controlled and deliberate. His eyes stayed open. When she finally tied off the last stitch, he exhaled slowly and rested his chin against her thigh. "There you go," she murmured, stroking the soft fur behind his ear. She'd been calling him Talon in her head from the moment she'd read the designation stamped on his collar, because it suited him. Precise, purposeful, made for a specific kind of work. "You're okay now." She stayed awake with him until the storm began to ease somewhere around 4 in the morning, her grandfather's old 30-06, leaning against the workbench within arm's reach. She couldn't have explained the rifle to anyone. She just felt better with it there. By the time grey light started filtering through the high barn windows, she was asleep in the folding chair, the rifle across her lap. She woke to silence. The blanket Talon had been lying on was empty. She was on her feet in half a second, scanning the barn. Talon. A single sharp movement in her peripheral vision. She turned. He was standing near the barn's main door, rigid as a fence post. Every muscle in his body was locked. His ears were swiveled forward, angled toward the gap beneath the door, and there was a low vibration coming from his chest. Not quite a growl, something lower and more deliberate. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the outside. Willa felt the first cold finger of dread slide down the back of her neck. She crossed to him slowly, filled a water bowl, called him over. He came, drank briefly, and returned to his post. As he passed her, he pressed the warm weight of his shoulder against her leg for just a moment, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like communication, and then he was a statue again, amber eyes locked on the gap beneath the door. She fed him, tended his bandages, and headed to the house. Kylie was already gone, let herself out before dawn. Upstairs, Penny was still asleep in her room, surrounded by the usual chaos of art supplies and picture books and one very large stuffed horse named Captain. Willa stood in the doorway watching her daughter breathe for longer than she needed to. 6 years old, brown hair fanned across the pillow, missing her 2 front teeth. Downstairs, she poured coffee and opened her laptop. Typed in K9FT4. Nothing. She tried variations, tried searching for the vest manufacturer, military working dog programs, specialized K9 units active in Montana. She found general information, public affairs photos, retired dog adoption pages. Nothing that matched the specific configuration of gear she'd handled the night before. Then the Wi-Fi dropped. She looked at the router. The signal light was solid red. She picked up her phone. 0 bars, 0. Willa had lived on this property for 3 years. She'd had cell service through blizzards, power outages, and the ice storm of 24 that had taken down half the county's infrastructure for 11 days. She had always had at least 2 bars. She set the phone down very carefully on the counter. Outside the kitchen window, the morning was wrong. The chickens weren't making noise. No wind in the pines. Even the usual distant hum of the highway was gone, swallowed into a silence so complete it had a physical weight. Mama! She turned. Penny stood at the bottom of the stairs in her dinosaur pajamas, squinting against the kitchen light. "Hey, sweet pea." Willa walked to her and pulled her into a hug. "Too tight, probably." Penny made a small sound of protest. "Snow day," Willa said, pulling back and smiling with everything she had. "Movies, hot chocolate, blanket fort if you want. But inside today, don't go out on the porch." "Can I see the horses later?" "Maybe later, inside for now." She got Penny settled in the living room with a blanket nest and a stack of DVDs, and then she went back to the barn. Talon hadn't moved from the door. When she came in, he turned and looked at her. The amber eyes were steady and urgent in the way of someone who has been trying to communicate through a language barrier and has run entirely out of patience. He swung his gaze to the rear wall of the barn, the wall that faced the north tree line, and held it there. Willa heard it then, not a sound exactly, more like a pressure change, the particular heaviness of air that precedes something. She moved to the small side window, wiped the condensation with her sleeve, and looked out. The tree line was about 70 yards out, Montana ponderosa, packed tight, the kind of timber that swallowed light. At first she saw nothing but snow and trunks and shadow. Then she saw the first figure. Dressed head to toe in matte black tactical gear, moving through the trees with a fluid, unhurried patience that no hunter ever had. He wasn't pushing through branches, he was flowing around them. He carried a compact suppressed rifle at a low ready, and he moved with the absolute silence of a man for whom silence was not discipline but instinct. She found the second one a moment later, then a third, moving in a loose wedge formation, angled toward the house where Penny was alone. Willa did not panic. She went somewhere past panic into a cold, clarifying stillness she recognized from her worst field calls. Foaling gone wrong, horse down, equipment failure at 2 a.m, 30 miles from the nearest clinic. The part of her brain that was a frightened young woman went very quiet. The part that was a professional took over completely. She loaded the rifle. Talon pressed against her left leg. He lowered his head. His body was coiled and ready, the injured flank tight but held. Ready. "Back hatch," she said, barely a breath. Her grandfather had built this barn in 1963, and he'd been a practical man. There was a secondary hatch at the rear, originally designed for running water lines through to the south pasture. It opened into a drainage channel thick with overgrown brush, shielded from any direct line of sight to the tree line. She unlatched it. Cold air poured through. Talon went first, belly low, and moved through the brush with a precision that made her feel enormous and obvious by comparison. She followed him, staying as low as she could manage, the frozen ground biting through the knees of her jeans, the rifle slung across her back. They were 40 yards from the kitchen door when Talon locked up. Instantly, one moment moving, the next a statue. Willa froze beside him. She waited 3 full seconds, breathing through her nose before she found him. A figure materializing from the fog between them and the house, 20 feet away, maybe less. Black gear, suppressed weapon, a night vision rig pushed up on his helmet like a second pair of eyes. He was sweeping in a slow, methodical pattern, scanning the terrain. He hadn't seen them yet. His sweep was coming their direction. 10 seconds, maybe 8. Talon moved. Not with panic, with the controlled, predetermined execution of years of training. 3 bounds, each one nearly silent in the snow, and 85 out of Belgian Malinois hit the man square in the chest. The operator grunted and went down hard, his rifle wrenched sideways by the weight of the dog's jaws, clamped on his forearm. Willa covered the distance in 5 steps. When the operator reached for the combat knife on his vest, she drove the butt of the rifle into the side of his helmet. The impact traveled up through her wrists and forearms. The man went still. Talon out. The dog released and sat back, watching her face, waiting. Her hands shaking, Willa knelt and patted down the unconscious man. No unit patches, no insignia of any kind. Not even an American flag on the shoulder. She unclipped the radio from his harness. Static. Then a clipped, controlled voice. Echo 2, report status. Team is breaching the primary structure in 45 seconds. Confirm location of the asset. The primary structure, the house. Willa stood and ran. She covered the open ground to the back porch in a flat sprint, Talon stride for stride beside her, and hit the back door with her shoulder. Inside, she threw every lock, then took the stairs 2 at a time. Penny. She was in her daughter's room before she'd finished the word. The little girl looked up from the DVD menu, surprised. Hiding game. We're going to the basement, okay? Fast. What hiding game? The basement one. She was already picking her daughter up, hoisting her onto her hip, quick and quiet. Penny was old enough to read her mother's face. She did not argue. Willa got them both downstairs, and through the basement to the root cellar, a thick-walled concrete room her grandfather had built for exactly the kind of Montana winter that could lock a family in for a week. Canned goods, water, a sleeping bag, an emergency kit. "You stay here," Willa told her daughter, crouching to eye level. "You don't come out until you hear my voice, not any other voice, only mine, understand?" Penny's lower lip trembled once. She nodded. "I love you." Willa kissed her forehead. "Flashlights in the supply bin. Stay under the blankets." She locked the cellar from the outside and went back upstairs. She killed every light in the house and took position behind the kitchen's granite island, crouching low, the rifle's muzzle toward the hallway. She racked the bolt once, slowly, and let the sound carry. Outside, the stolen radio crackled. "Breach, breach, breach!" The front door didn't open. It ceased to exist. The entire frame blew inward in a single detonation of splintered oak, and 3 dark figures swept through the gap in a tight wedge, red laser dots swinging across the walls. They moved through the living room with a terrible, rehearsed synchronicity, clearing corners, calling clear, and then the boots were in the hallway, coming toward the kitchen. Willa pressed her back against the granite. Beside her, Talon lay flat on the tile, chin on the floor, amber eyes tracking the moving light. "Clear the ground floor," a voice said, quiet, used to being obeyed. "The dog is the priority. Find the asset." A laser dot swept the cabinets. It moved toward the counter's edge. Willa breathed once. "I have a rifle trained on the kitchen entrance," she said. Her voice came out steady, and she was privately stunned by this. "The first person who steps through that doorway doesn't walk back out. Leave my house." Silence. Then a single set of footsteps, measured and unhurried. A figure appeared in the hallway doorway, keeping most of his body behind the frame. He reached up and removed his balaclava. He was in his early 50s, lean and iron-gray, with the face of a man who had spent decades being the most dangerous person in every room he entered and had stopped noticing it. His eyes were pale blue and entirely without warmth. "Dr. Harker," he said in the tone of a man who had made this kind of introduction many times before. "My name is Director Alan Prescott. I represent a private contracting organization operating under federal mandate. You are currently in possession of classified government property, and I need you to tell me where the tactical vest is." "That dog is not property," Willa said. Prescott's expression did not change. "The K9 is secondary. What concerns me is the data drive sewn into the lining of his vest." He paused. "Sergeant Declan Briggs, his handler, suffered a fatal incident during a training exercise 2 nights ago. The dog became disoriented and fled the area, taking the drive with him. That drive contains highly sensitive operational data that belongs to my organization. Tell me where the vest is, and this ends tonight with no further harm to anyone." Willa kept the rifle level. She was thinking about the module she'd smashed in the barn, the green blinking light, the complete absence of any unit markings on anyone in this team. A training accident. Beside her, Talon made a sound low in his chest. Not aggression. Something older and quieter than aggression. The sound of an animal that had heard a lie told about someone he loved and had no language to refute it with. "Your men shot him," Willa said. Prescott exhaled. It was the exhale of a man slightly behind schedule. "The vest, Dr. Harker. Last chance to be cooperative about this." "It's in the barn," Willa said. "On the workbench." She watched his eyes when she said it. "We swept the barn twice," Prescott said without any change in expression. The vest wasn't there. Willa understood in that moment. Not all of it. Not the full shape of what Sergeant Briggs had discovered, or what was on the drive, or how far Prescott's operation reached. but she understood the part that mattered. The vest wasn't in the barn because she had moved it the previous afternoon when she'd taken Penny downstairs for a quiet hour before dinner. She'd brought the vest down to the root cellar with the rest of Talon's gear, intending to examine it more closely when she had time. She'd shoved it in the supply bin and covered it with the spare wool blanket. It was 3 feet from her daughter right now. "Take her," Prescott said quietly, stepping back from the doorway. The 2 operators behind him began to move. And then the world outside went white. The kitchen windows, the living room windows, every pane of glass in the house flooded simultaneously with a blinding, diffuse light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound arrived with it, not an explosion, but in its own way just as absolute. The deep rhythmic percussion of heavy rotor blades hammering through fog, multiple aircraft moving fast and low over the ranch, the pressure of it vibrating in Willa's teeth. The walls shook. A cabinet door swung open on its own. Prescott raised his radio. His voice for the first time had a crack in it. "Status, who is inbound?" The response came back fractured with interference. Multiple aircraft, Director. Black Hawks fast roping on the north and west perimeters, FBI markings, NCIS markings. There's a ground team breaching the south fence line. A loudspeaker tore through the rotor wash. "This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Naval Criminal Investigative Service. All personnel, drop your weapons and move to the exterior with hands clearly virid. You are completely surrounded. Comply immediately." Prescott's composure fractured. It lasted only a second, just long enough for Willa to see the calculation break down behind those pale eyes. Then it reassembled into something harder and more dangerous. He raised his rifle and pointed it at the kitchen counter. "Evidence," he said flatly and without emotion. Talon did not wait for a command. He came off the tile floor in one movement, cleared the granite island as though it wasn't there, and hit Prescott at shoulder height with enough momentum to drive the man back into the hallway wall. The rifle discharged into the ceiling. Drywall dust came down like snow. Prescott hit the floor, struggling, both hands fighting to keep Talon's jaws from his throat, and the dog held the grip, controlled, trained, precise, with his full weight bearing down. Willa stood up from behind the counter. She had the rifle on the 2 remaining operators before either of them had processed what had happened. "Down, both of you. Weapons on the floor now." They looked at each other. They looked at their commander pinned to the floor by a Belgian Malinois. They looked at the blazing white light flooding through every window, the shadows of fast-roping figures crossing the front lawn, the unmistakable sound of a perimeter being closed from every direction. They put their weapons on the floor. The front doorway, what remained of it, disappeared entirely as a 6-person FBI entry team swept through in gear emblazoned with yellow letters, followed immediately by an NCIS team through the back. The house was secured in under 2 minutes. Prescott was pulled from the floor in handcuffs and bleeding from the forearm, cursing steadily and without apparent concern for who heard him, the way men curse when they know the next years of their life have just been decided. "Easy, Talon, down, bud, stand down." The voice came from a tall woman in a navy windbreaker, NCIS on the back, badge clipped at her hip. She said it with the flat, practiced ease of someone who had worked around trained dogs for most of her career. Talon released immediately, stepped back, and sat. He was breathing hard, one ear angled forward, watching Prescott be walked out the front with the focused attention of an animal that understood exactly what accountability looked like and was making sure it was done completely. The agent turned to Willa. "Dr. Harker, Special Agent Dana Farrell, NCIS." She looked around the demolished kitchen with the unhurried expression of someone beginning a very long report. "Where is your daughter?" "Root cellar, basement stairs." Farrell spoke quietly into her radio. 2 minutes later, an agent appeared at the basement door with Penny in his arms, the little girl wide-eyed and clutching her flashlight in one fist, blinking at all the lights and people and noise. She spotted her mother and reached with both arms. Willa took her daughter and held on. Outside, the helicopters were beginning their slow power down in the north pasture, their searchlights casting long white columns through the residual fog. Through the kitchen window, Willa watched Prescott being walked to an armored vehicle, flanked by 4 agents who were not particularly careful with his head when they put him in. Farrell came to stand beside her. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, and she offered one without asking. Willa took it without speaking. "Sergeant Briggs was one of ours," Farrell said. "NCIS embedded with Prescott's contracting unit 20 months ago. Prescott had been running an illegal operation for years, using classified military logistics routes to move unauthorized weapons shipments. Briggs documented everything. 17 months of evidence on a biometric encrypted drive." She paused. "Prescott found out 4 days ago. Briggs activated a distress beacon before they got to him. Talon was with him when it happened. Dog took the vest and ran." Willa looked at the Belgian Malinois. He had found his way to Penny and was now sitting beside her on the living room floor, patient and still, while her daughter methodically examined his ears with the thoroughness of a small scientist. "The drive," Willa said. "Prescott said it was in the vest." "It is." Agent Farrell allowed herself a brief, quiet smile. "It was in the supply bin in your root cellar, under a wool blanket which your daughter had apparently been using as an additional pillow for the better part of the last 3 hours. She shook her head slightly. "Prescott's team swept that barn twice, checked every outbuilding on the property. Never occurred to them to look in a concrete storm cellar." Willa thought about the blinking green light she'd smashed with a wrench at 3 in the morning, acting on nothing more than a vague feeling of wrongness. She thought about moving the vest downstairs without any particular plan, just tidying, just putting things out of the way. She thought about Talon on that first night, resting his chin on her leg after the last stitch. That look she'd read as gratitude, but maybe was something more specific. Recognition, perhaps. The particular relief of an animal that has been running alone for too long and has finally found someone worth stopping for. "Briggs," she said. "He had family." Farrell's expression shifted by a few degrees. "A brother in Spokane. We'll notify him tonight." The silence that follows violence has a particular quality, hollow and thin, like the air after a storm has moved through and taken everything loose with it. They stood in it for a moment, without speaking, both watching the activity in the yard, the organized machinery of a federal operation, closing down around what remained of the night. "What happens to Talon?" Willa asked. Farrell looked toward the living room, where Penny had graduated from the ear examination and was now leaning her full body weight against the dog's side with the confidence of a child who has decided something is hers. Talon had not moved. His eyes kept their slow, steady sweep of the room, tracking each agent who passed the doorway, cataloguing, assessing, while his body remained perfectly still beneath the weight of the little girl. "Handler's gone. Combat injury on record. By regulation, he's eligible for honorable retirement." Farrell glanced at Willa sideways. "Placement requires someone with adequate space, relevant experience with high-drive working breeds, and, this is the part that catches most people off guard, the disposition to live comfortably with a dog that never entirely stops working, even when the work is over." Willa watched her daughter. Penny had given up on using Talon as furniture and was now lying on her stomach in front of him, holding a conversation in a very serious whisper about something Willa couldn't hear. Talon turned his head and looked directly at Willa. The amber eyes were steady and patient, and carried in them the particular quality of an animal that has already made its assessment of a situation and is simply waiting for the humans to arrive at the same conclusion. "I know a vet," Willa said. Farrell picked up her empty coffee cup and turned toward the door. Outside, the last helicopter was winding down, its rotors slowing to a stop, the searchlights cutting out one by one until the pasture was just dark and snow, and the ordinary quiet of a Montana morning coming back to itself. "Mama," Penny said from the living room floor, not looking up. "Can he stay?" Willa looked at the dog. He thumped his tail once against the hardwood, slow and deliberate, and held her gaze. "Yeah," she said, "he can stay."